Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Super congratulations, class of 2025. You did it. My name is Samara Berger. I am with the Office of Enrollment Management, and I am so excited to welcome you to our Trailblazers series. This session is called NYU Trailblazers, Why Global Asia? Why are we studying this in present times? With Dr. Tansen of NYU Shanghai. Our hope today is that you'll get a glimpse into our vibrant academic community. You'll see for yourself why this place has become home for so many, and you'll get a little taste of what it's like to sit in on that classroom. So we hope you leave today feeling really inspired by our faculty, excited by the possibility of joining this rich, diverse community of thinkers, scholars, change makers, go-getters, you fill in the blank. So before we go any further, I just do want to share a couple of housekeeping tips. Please note you will be muted throughout the duration of this session, but while we cannot see you, we do feel your energy out there, and we really hope you stick with us throughout the duration of this webinar. We will not cover any admissions or financial aid info today, but if you do have questions about the next steps of your admissions process, please visit our website, give us a call, send us an email. Our staff is always ready and available to help you answer any of your questions, address any of your concerns. And if you are interested in asking any questions about this session, you're able to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We have a couple of staff members who will be answering questions behind the scenes, and we should also have some time for live Q&A at the end of our session. So let's get started. I would like to introduce you all to Dr. Tansen Sen. Dr. Sen is a professor of history, the director of the Center for Global Asia at NYU Shanghai, and a global network professor at NYU. He's the author of Buddhism, Diplomacy, and Trade, the Realignment of Sino-Indian Relations from 1600 to 1400, and India, China, and the World, A Connected History. He's co-authored Traditional China in Asia and World History, edited Buddhism Across Asia, Networks of Material, Cultural, and Intellectual Exchange, and co-edited Traveling Past, The Politics of Cultural Heritage in the Indian Ocean World, and Beyond Pan and Asianism, Connecting China and India in the 1840s to 1960s. He's currently working on a book about Zhang He's maritime expeditions in the early 15th century, a monograph of Jawaharlal Nehru and China, and co-editing the Cambridge History of the Indian Ocean, Volume 1. In this webinar, Dr. Sen will discuss how in the next several decades, Asia will remain the focal point of global economy, geopolitics, and technological and cultural innovations. With this in mind, Asia must be reconceived beyond its continental and national state contours, since new and old migrant communities, as well as Asian students and researchers located at various corners of the world, are key players in the global impact of Asia. How should we understand and analyze the historical, contemporary, and future contributions of this globalized Asia? How has this global impacted the lives of Asians and the study of Asia? In this talk, we're going to talk about all of these issues. So, Dr. Sen, take it away.
Thank you, Samara, and congratulations to all of you for getting admitted to NYU. I look forward to seeing many of you, if not in Shanghai, then in New York. I go between New York and Shanghai. I joined NYU Shanghai in 2017. Before that, I was teaching in New York at the City University of New York. But next year, I'll be in New York teaching at NYU. One of the things I wanted to emphasize in this, let's say, discussion with all of you who are interested in perhaps studying Asia, to highlight the importance of Asia. And if you have seen the Oscar, your time yesterday, if you are in New York this morning, if you are in China, we know that Asia is in the news. And this is amazing time for being Asian in some respect. Not only this year, but even last year, we had an Asian director who won the Oscar Prize for one of the really great movies. And if you have not seen Parasite, I recommend that you watch Parasite. But this is a moment of celebration for Asians and for Asia. In 2 years in a row, we have Asians winning Oscar awards, and especially the gender issue as well that needs to be emphasized for this year. And talking about gender, another way in which we celebrate is the Vice President of the United States is of Asian background as well. And so we have a cause for celebration for those of us who live in the US. And those of you who are going to study in New York City to encounter perhaps one of the most important female politicians at this time. But at the same time, I should highlight not everything is good. Not everything is what we want to be. The fact sitting in Shanghai The coverage of Oscars this year was banned because of not only the director who won the prize, but also a short documentary on Hong Kong. So we have to be aware that there are causes of celebration with regard to Asia, but also cause of concerns with regard to what's going on in Asia, and highlighting the importance of studying not only the positives, but also the negatives as well. And I come from India. I was born in India, and certainly India is going through a very, very sad time with the COVID situation reaching perhaps drastic levels not seen any time before or anywhere in the world. And again, this is not a cause for celebration, but a cause for concern, and also a reason to study what's going on in Asia. Those of you who are of Asian descent in the US also have a cause for concern with the ways in which the Asians are treated recently in the US. So we have a number of issues to celebrate about Asia and Asians, and also a number of issues to be concerned about Asia and Asians. And that's why I wanted to highlight that these are the reasons why I think it's worth studying Asia. I'm certain it won't be all of yours major, but certainly I think it would be good for you to study this important part of the world that is relevant, was relevant, and I would argue would be relevant in the future. I'll talk a little bit about myself. If you are interested in looking at my own background, I was born in India. I grew up in China, did my PhD in the US. This is a site on NYU Shanghai website talking about my own encounter with China and India, and how I'm encountering China again as an Indian coming from the US. I came to China in 1982 with my parents. This is one of my early pictures with my parents on the Great Wall. Those of you who are planning to come to Shanghai, I'm sure you'll go to Beijing and visit the Great Wall as well. I did my undergraduate and master's in China from 83 to 90, did various kinds of cultural activities. Those of you who are Chinese already know many of these issues, making dumplings and so forth. If you are a foreigner coming to NYU Shanghai, I'm sure you'll be engaging in various cultural activities and also traveling to different places. China is really a fascinating place to travel around once the COVID pandemic has ended. Yeah, actually, even today we can go around China. It's very much different from other places. Here, travel is not restricted these days. Um, like many Chinese growing up in the 80s in China, I also had an American dream. I went to Penn to do my PhD. This picture is at the Disneyland in California. I did my PhD at Pennsylvania, and then started teaching at CUNY. I taught for 20 years, teaching Asian history. My own research relates to China-India connections, but also Asian history in general, Buddhism in particular. And then I taught that until 2017 at City University of New York before coming to NYU Shanghai. This has been a really very interesting transition, coming back to China as a professor and teaching not only foreign students, but also Chinese students. I run here at NYU Shanghai, and if you're coming to NYU Shanghai, either as a student at this university or as a study abroad, I run this center called Center for Global Asia, where we have interns who are students at NYU Shanghai or visiting NYU Shanghai as a study abroad student, engaging in various kinds of activities. And I'll recommend you to visit this website that's on NYU Shanghai websites and see the kinds of events we have done, the kinds of conferences we have done to understand Asia in more detail and also from many different perspectives. We have a publication plan. We engage with various kinds of student activities and talking about Asia in general. So I would recommend that you visit the website and see the kinds of activities on Asia that we have done in the last 4 or 5 years since I came to China. I just wanted to also emphasize this term Asia is not of Asian origin. Many people in Asia actually did not use this term until the 19th century or early 20th century. The term was devised by the Westerners, the Greeks, early phase. The Aegean Sea, I'll show you in the map, was the term through which this Asia, the word originated. And it was used especially for those who are living in and around Persia, Iran today. But as you see from the last quote here from Herodotus, the very famous Greek historian, the perception of Asia ended in India. There was very little knowledge about China. Actually, when Alexander the Great invaded across most of Asia, for them, Asia ended with India, and then there was I mean, they considered the world to be flat, and then that was it. This was a beginning of Asia as a term. It's something, word that is given by the Westerners, especially with regard to Turkey and Iran. This is the area, the Aegean Sea. So anything east of this was mostly Asia. So you can see the misconceptualization of this place that we now call Asia from the very beginning. And that's again a reason why we must look at Asia differently, not from a Western perspective, but perhaps from an Asian perspective. Now, the reason for that is also very important. This idea of us versus them. When the Europeans colonized much of Africa and Asia, they introduced a number of ways in which they perceived Asia as perhaps a land of mythical origin, exotic, land of riches. The reason why they had to colonize Asia was then presented as a way to get all this stuff from Asia. There was a brief period of a positive way of looking at Asia, but most likely, and this is the reason why I think studying the negative aspect of how Asia is being used is quite important. Why this kind of a resentment against Asians, not only in the US, but other places. It was seen as a backward, underdeveloped, passive, irrational, despotic, and even uncivilized region. And this is quite common, especially in the 19th century. And then we know also this when the migrants from Asia, the Chinese, went to the US, that perception continued in the US. So the negative portrayal of Asia, Chinese, Indians, West Asians is something quite important to understand. And this is the reason, again, I emphasize the perspectives of Asians from abroad is something is important to understand in the current times and what is happening with regard to racism, for example, in various parts of the world, including in the US. Now, I call the talk a global Asia, and the reason for that is as our center at NYU Shanghai and in my own studies, we want to emphasize that Asia is actually everywhere. And the reason why is it everywhere is because people moved out of Asia a long time back, and they started moving not only away, but also coming back. So this is a world migration of map of people moving not only from India and China, but also from Israel and Palestine, going to different places. They connected all these regions, all these continents, and bringing Asia to different places. So I would argue, and this is how I would define global Asia, that Asia is globally present. Asians are globally present, and that's why it becomes important not only to study the countries that we know and call China and India, but people who have migrated from Asia to Africa, to South America, to North America, their history, their contribution, which we see today in the Oscar awards, need to be examined, needs to be studied. So Asia, when studied, needs to be studied globally is the argument that I would present. And this is the map. If you look at it, what is the visual perception? I'm sure some of you would be majoring in IMA, Interactive Media Arts, but how do you visualize this global Asia? This is how it would look like without any continents, without any states. This is the interactive Asia that we have. And these connections between people who migrated, came back, moved back again, continuously moving, the ways in which technologies are transmitted, the ways in which knowledge is produced. All these are basically the networks, the connections that make global Asia quite complex and worth understanding. It has a history, it has a presence, and it will have a future as well. So I would say, in order to understand this global Asia concept, you have to get rid of the construction of land masses, nation states, and those kinds of constraints, and look at these kinds of lines that connect different places of the world, of the globe. Um, Now, this global Asia, I would say, is a new framework to study Asia, and examining Asia beyond places that are constrained by various kinds of geopolitics and so forth. So you can see this in migration studies, international relations, that Asia is relevant not only for Asians, but for Africans, and also to the US, given current relations between China and the US. The global networks of Asia and Asians, commercial linkages, economic linkages, very, very important. When the world was going through financial crisis in the 1990s, Asia was a key region which stabilized eventually the world economy, and that contribution of Asia, I think the global contribution of Asia is quite important. The other part of this global Asia is the globe comes into Asia. And then we see this in pop culture, various kinds of music, various kinds of ways of expressing yourself, especially the young people, have become part of where I sit in China. It is very much a global city, Shanghai. And then you see various parts of the world being represented not only in pop culture, but also in cuisine. You get fascinating food in Shanghai, very much like New York. So if you are coming from New York to Shanghai, I'll tell you that you'll find it very, very similar in Shanghai. And even the language won't be a problem if you are concerned about that. But I think global Asia needs to be studied with regard to its contribution and impact globally, and both positive and negative. And I think this is the way in which we study not only Asia, but Asia in a globe. And that's what I would encourage many of you. If you are going to take one class, try to see how Asia really matters to the world. And then this is also part of our own global network university idea, right? We are present globally. We have two campuses, Abu Dhabi and Shanghai, in Asia, but we also have a portal site, study abroad site in Tel Aviv, and also in Sydney. So you can really experience different ideas about Asia, going from Tel Aviv to Abu Dhabi, coming to Shanghai, going to Sydney. And then if you are based at NYU Shanghai, I would encourage you not only to go to New York, but also go to Abu Dhabi and see Asia very differently from the other side of the Asian continent. So I would say this whole uniqueness that we have of global network university is really fascinating. And then I would encourage you, and some of you have to go through the study abroad year to go and see various parts of Asia. And even if you go to Florence, which is one of the more popular sites, of course, after the pandemic ends, you'll see Asia there. You'll see the connections between Europe and Asia in Florence. If you go to Buenos Aires, if you go to Ghana, you'll see those kinds of connections expressed there in many of the campuses that we have across the world. And that is the unique feature of our NYU Global Network University. If you come to Shanghai, we have a major called Global China Studies major. This is a very unique major that we have. China is a relevant part of global Asia, and you can major in this. We are planning to introduce this Global China Studies as a GNU minor, so that you can minor in Global China Studies no matter where in GNU you are, and then you can engage with China as a way to learn Asia. I usually teach a course called Concept of China. In fact, I'm teaching it to NYU students, the Go Local NYU students who are in Shanghai. It's part of the NYU core. It's called the Culture and Context, and I'm I'm dealing with the issue of concept of China, which is a fascinating way of looking at how these notions that we think are quite simple, these terms like China, quite simple. Where does it come from? What actually China means? These are the textbooks that I use, including one textbook that talks about what is China actually. And also one book that's called The Billion Voices, about how did this Chinese language that people talk about today came about, right? And so this is a fascinating way of looking at how China is a very interesting, complex concept. And so if you come to NYU Shanghai, and if you are in New York next year, I'll most likely will be teaching this course in New York either next spring or next fall. So you are welcome to take this class. And I'll answer your questions if you have with regard to studying at NYU Shanghai, or studying Asia, or studying China for that matter. I'm sure coming in as a freshman, you'll have lots of questions about what major, why major in certain things, but whatever help I can give, whatever advice I can give, I'll be happy to share with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sen. This was such an amazing taste of your class, of your subject. And I can attest to the part about the food being like truly amazing. When I visited NYU Shanghai, I don't think I've ever eaten so well before. It was truly an experience. So I think regardless of which campus you're headed to, you will definitely have a cuisine experience. But like you said, we would love to take some questions from our audience. So feel free to drop those in the Q&A box. And to get us started, I would love to pose a question to you
Sure.
about where you think, or what do you think the future of global Asia can look like if we're paying a little bit more attention?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, because the answer comes from different directions, right? So there is a medical aspect to it, how perhaps Asia would contribute to the future of development of medicine. As you know, that there have been a number of vaccines that are manufactured in China, but one of the largest producing places of vaccine is actually in India. Which is making and distributing vaccines across the world. But technologically, the idea of the soft power, the soft technology, the hard technology, which is used for political purposes as well. So the politics of China, India, West Asia, Palestine, Israel, all these things would matter. And again, there would be complex issues about it. Some will be good, some will be problematic. So the idea is, no matter if you are dealing with medicine or technology or politics, there are issues that we need to consider. But the most important future of global Asia are the people. People moving around, and I'm waiting for the pandemic to end, where people can come around and travel in Asia, go back and forth, carry their views and ideas, exchange the ideas of whatever they are coming from with people in Asia. So that kind of exchange, I think, will be relevant for the future of the world. And connected to that part is, I think, the environmental issue. China and India are the largest pollutants in the world. I mean, they pollute the environment. And they have to come to terms that whatever they do has a global planetary impact. And I think the future, the negative aspect of the future, if you are talking about it, is how China and India contributes to the pollution of the world. And they have to come to that term. And they have to think about others as they think about themselves as well.
I love that point. I think that's such a great thing to touch on, and such a thing as NYU students, that interdisciplinary study of really understanding different layers and how globally we do impact one another. So we have a question from one of our guests, Ranak. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, which builds a little bit off of your response there. So in recent days, India and China have seen a realignment in relations over border disputes and diplomatic kerfuffles. I love that word. Do you think the future will see a NATO-India Western support alliance in opposition to Russia and China as this great power struggle kind of reemerges?
Yeah, for me, I think grouping countries together is perhaps not the solution. It creates more problems than solving an issue. I think collaboration is important, and especially at the times that we are dealing with. I think we should be thinking about collaborations. There are border issues, there are political issues, but when do we overcome it? I think new generation like your generation that's coming in as a freshman should be thinking about alternate solutions to the existing ways in which we divide the world based on politics. Can we overcome it? And again, I emphasize, environment is a concern of for everybody, no matter which political entity you come from, no matter what you believe your politics is. And I think that is the block we need. We need a joint block to basically address the environmental issue. So I wish countries that have border issues, China, India included, Russia, whichever country there is, hopefully they can come together. And I think the recent thing that Biden did was quite important, bringing the leaders together, talking about environment. I think is a good step. But I think it's up to you, the new generation, to carry that forward. And I would lead you into that direction about creating a bloc that is responsible for addressing the environmental concerns of everybody.
I love that. So important. And something that NYU champions, regardless of which campus you're studying at, sustainability is incredibly important. And like you said, this is this generation that's going to help us turn things around. So I have a wonderful question a little bit kind of about the general of NYU Shanghai and studying global Asia, and how do you discuss also the political relations between China and the US? And if you're not an NYU Shanghai student, how can you maybe maximize this global Asia studies?
Yeah, so the Global Asia is also present at Abu Dhabi and also in New York. So Professor David Ludden at NYU runs his own Global Asia Studies Center. Mark Swisslocki at Abu Dhabi does so. So we have a connection. We are actually looking at how Indian Ocean is a way in which we connect various parts of Asia. But also the port cities, New York, as you know, is a port city. So we have classes in NYU already. Actually, there are two courses introducing Global Asia, pre-modern and modern. So you can take it at NYU. In Abu Dhabi, also you have courses. In fact, Professor Suslocki in Abu Dhabi and I have taught a course online before the pandemic in 2017, actually, on Global Asia. And then that's a fascinating course because we see students in both places looking at Asia differently. So no matter which campus you are in New York, Abu Dhabi, or in Shanghai, you'll experience courses that are about Asia. It may be about West Asia in Abu Dhabi. It may be about Asian migrants in New York, and perhaps on China in Shanghai. But as we create this GNU minor in global Asian studies, I think you'll be able to mix and match. And this does not prevent you from taking courses elsewhere. There's a large Asian population in South America, for example. So if you are going there, you can take courses about the Asian migrants in South America. If you go to Ghana, there's a lot of investment, Chinese investment in Ghana. You can look at the Chinese investment there. So you can work on Global Asia wherever you are within the NYU Global Network campus. And yes, we have courses on China's relations with the US. It's a very important course. It's taught here. And I think it's also taught in New York. So yeah, so it'll be good as you move around the campus, you take different courses. If you are interested in China and the US, maybe the best place to come to is Shanghai and take courses here. We have a very excellent professor, very renowned professor called Chen Jian, who has worked on US-China relations for over 30 years now. So you might take his course when you come to NYU Shanghai.
I love that. I love that you could truly study so many different aspects at all of our campuses, whether you're studying away or studying permanently. It truly is like the world is your oyster, pretty much, when you come to NYU, and you really get to carve out your passions and the things that interest you the most. And Shauna would love to know, are there other areas of study that you feel like serve as a good complement to global China studies?
Yeah, I mean, so one is we are trying to develop Japanese studies and Japanese language at NYU Shanghai. But I would say NYU itself has a very strong non-China Asia component as well. that you can study. Abu Dhabi has a really very good West Asia curriculum that focuses on Indian Ocean. So you can use that as well. But if you're in Shanghai, you can take courses that are relevant to other parts of Asia as well. We do not have a global Asia studies major as such, but you have courses that look at different aspects of Asia, Asian literature, Asian history, and Asian religions. So yes, there are other things beyond China that you can work. And I would really encourage all of you to perhaps take a course on Asian migrations, which not only talks about, there's a question about heritage here, right? The Asian heritage that people had before they moved to other places, and then they acquired new heritage. And the answer to this question about heritage is heritage keeps on changing over time. And with globalization, you get new kinds of heritage introduced into your countries, and that makes a new heritage. And yes, I would recommend that you take, if there's one course you want to take about Asia, I would really encourage taking something on migration, because that's the very important connective feature of Asia, not only within Asia, but outside Asia as well.
Definitely. And I think, like you said, you touched on Walid's question here about heritage. And I think being able to look at that and study that migration, you can actually see the influence of that heritage being infused rather than being watered down. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, and it becomes really, it's a hybrid culture that emerges, or hybrid heritage that emerges when the new things from a new place that you now start living at is introduced. And this you see in the food culture, right? You find fascinating kinds of food that emerges in the US, for example, because the Chinese settle in the US. So if you go and eat chop suey, for example, it's an American take on Chinese food. Whose heritage is that, right? I mean, so I think this kind of exchanges, interactions, connections, merging of cultures is the fascinating aspect. And the resistance to the culture also happens. But that is also interested to, I mean, why would you preserve culture? And that's a question that I think migration studies also answers, right? How you preserve your identity as you move to a new place. And this is fascinating if you look at the Chinese in the US, Indians in the US, how they are still trying to preserve some of their cultural identities in a global setting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And how important do you think it is for Asia to be super involved in that business and economic space as they already are in the future? And as an American studying in Asia or at NYU Shanghai specifically, do you feel like it's difficult for students to find job opportunities and internships?
No, I mean, for the second part of the question, I think we are trying to create lots of internship opportunities here for students who are coming to China. I think that's a very good experience. When I studied in China, I worked for an Indian company here, in a pharmaceutical company, interning there. I think the internship experience is absolutely very, very important. And we usually try to place students in various companies and other organizations to intern at. I think that's and it doesn't have to be business companies. It can be NGOs and other non-governmental organizations that you can or academic institutions that you can intern at. But yes, business would matter, production would matter. It's not just China. Vietnam is becoming very important place for production of textiles and clothing. So Vietnam, I think, will become an important place for all of you to study. Unfortunately for NYU, we don't have much on Southeast Asia. But if you come to Shanghai, one of the places I would encourage you to go to is to Southeast Asia. There are fascinating places from Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore, where you'll see the merging of different cultures and societies, but also their relevance to present day business. Singapore is absolutely very, very important, even though it does not really manufacture anything, but it's a very important port that connects East and West. So, those things will continue as long as consumption continues. I mean, China's economy, if you have paid attention, recently grew by 18%. Why? It's because of domestic consumption, right? So I think business-wise, production-wise, consumption-wise, Asia will continue to matter.
Absolutely. And I think just to add on to your point, as a university, as an NYU student, we will help you find a job. We will help you find internships. We love to support your kind of academic moving into your professional career. So definitely not something to be concerned about. Um, all right, we're going to switch directions just a little bit, something that's a little bit more current events, a little bit controversial. But how do you feel? Do you have any specific opinions with regards to the vaccine diplomacy, especially with China recently revealing that their vaccine doesn't have quite as high of some of the efficacy rates that we see here in the US? And do you think that, India pausing those efforts, what are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think it's a sad situation that countries have to engage in this vaccine diplomacy. I think in the case of India, I can say that vaccines, instead of being sent abroad, should have been given to the people who need it, and we see the problem now. What China is doing is China is actually making people take the vaccine, even though there's no COVID cases here. There are zero COVID cases in China, but still it's making its people take the vaccine, which I think is good. I think that should be a priority, and this is what US is doing right now with COVID, is giving vaccines to the people. So I think in nation states, the priority should be their own citizens first, and sending vaccine out for countries like China and India just to compete with each other is perhaps not the right thing to do. But at the same time, you have to realize that there are certain countries in Africa, for example, that depend on the vaccines that is produced by China, produced by India, produced by USA. And that kind of a vaccine diplomacy to give vaccine through the UN to these countries that don't have the vaccine, I think that is a good thing. So as I said in the beginning, there are positive aspects and there are negative aspects. So the positive aspect of the vaccine diplomacy is that, yes, both China and India are actually providing vaccines to the countries that need it and can't manufacture it. And in many of the African countries, many of the South American countries are getting Chinese vaccines or Indian vaccines. So I think that is a positive side of vaccine, so-called diplomacy.
Yeah, and that is such an excellent kind of thought about this, and the part about actually providing vaccines to other places is not the things that we're seeing. It's not the information that we're seeing in the news. And I feel like that is a really important piece that is moving us towards a healthier new normal. And Ranak has a bit of a follow-up question to that. Do you think that the handling of COVID-19 is forever going to frame that global perspective where autocracies of the East handled COVID really well, while the democracies of the West seem to have failed miserably?
That's actually not true that only the one-party system countries or so-called communist countries controlled it. South Korea did quite well. Taiwan did quite well. Right? I think it depends on how the leadership actually went about addressing the issue of COVID. So I don't think it's a clear-cut distinction between a democracy or not a democracy. And you see in Europe, number of democracies did not do well for many different reasons. So you have Sweden having its own policies, UK had its own policies. But democracies like South Korea and Taiwan did things differently, and we're quite well managing the COVID situation. So I think instead of a political system, it is the political leadership that matters, and how you handle it. And we see that in the US now with the change in the government, things seems to have improved dramatically. I mean, how COVID is addressed. So instead of the political system, I would say it's the political leadership and how they decide to manage this kind of a terrible thing. And that management is quite important, irrespective of the political system.
Absolutely, really important distinction, and I appreciate that. Okay, so we're right at time. So just the last question, which I think is a great one to leave on from one of our attendees. What other readings or courses might you recommend on heritage and migration and continuing that study?
Yeah. I think the heritage and migration are very, very important ways of looking at not only Asia, but also other countries, because at some point they merge. Europe merges with Asia, America merges with Asia through the migration process. Especially at NYU, if you're going to NYU, there are a number of courses on heritage and Asian migration. And it's not only just Asian migration. I think African migration is also very important. Slavery issue is quite important. So it's not just to study Asia as such. Through migration, you'll see how different people of the world moved around. Some were forced to move, like the African slaves, or some of the Asians, also Indians and Chinese, who were sent to various Caribbean places, Caribbean islands, to work on sugar lands and so forth. But also at NYU Shanghai, we have a number of courses with regard to the Chinese immigration in Southeast Asia, for example, and the kinds of literature they produced, the kinds of films they produced. So the movement was not all the way to the US by the Chinese migrants. Southeast Asia is a key region where the Chinese moved to, and that created a fascinating culture in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and how the Chinese immigrants then met the Indian immigrants there and the locals. So it's a fascinating triangular connections, creating, some people would say, triple identity: Chinese, Indian, Southeast Asian. So I think you'll see in the list of courses, and I would highly recommend some of the migration study courses, and then not just limited to Asian migration history, but also I would also encourage African and currently, European migration as well, for those of you who are interested in how US became US, how Europeans came into the Americas, right? I mean, and so those are really fascinating courses that link up the global part to Asia.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think you also have the opportunity, should you study away while you're an NYU student, to study those things in the country where you are, which also just adds to your educational experience. And Dr. Sen, I feel like I could truly talk to you all day about this, but thank you so much for a wonderful session. It was such a pleasure. I want to thank our audience for being here and really being engaged. Your questions are amazing. I apologize we didn't get to everything, but please check out the site that we dropped in the chat a little bit earlier so you can see a little bit more about global Asia and all of those studies available at NYU Shanghai. Thank you again. Before we wrap up, there's a few ways that you can stay connected with us should you have any questions. So if you do have next step questions about your admissions, you can feel free to email us at admissions@nyu.edu. If you have questions specifically about NYU Shanghai, you can email at shanghai.admissions@nyu.edu. And similarly for NYU Abu Dhabi, nyuad.admissions@nyu.edu. And of course, follow us on all the social channels at Meet NYU. And if you have any other questions, anything you want to learn about, please don't hesitate to check out our website. I'm dropping something in the chat right now for you to search other events that may be happening as we wrap up this month and you are making your final decisions about college. So till we can officially welcome you back on campus in the fall, please be sure to check out everything online and visit what we hope that you can visit us soon. So thank you again so much. Congratulations, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Best of luck to all of you.